When I entered the courtroom, my son David crossed his arms and laughed. That mocking laugh I had known since his teenage years, when he thought he knew better than everyone else. His wife Jennifer just shook her head, as if she were looking at a pathetic man trying to dress for his own funeral. Then the judge looked up from his documents. The blood drained from his face instantly. His hand shook so badly that the gavel slipped from his fingers and hit the table with a sharp sound that echoed through the silent courtroom. He stared at me for a few long seconds, his eyes wide, before whispering a single word that no one else in the room could understand. Ghost. David and Jennifer looked at me in confusion. Their lawyer stopped shuffling through his papers. No one understood why the judge looked like he had seen a zombie. But I recognized John Carmichael immediately. 30 years older, gray hair, but the same nervous eyes he had when he was a rookie prosecutor about to lose the biggest case of his career. Until I appeared as an expert witness and handed over 12 corrupt executives on a silver platter. My name is Rob, I'm 72 years old, and for 3 decades I was known as the Scalpel, the Justice Department forensic investigator who cut through financial lies like a surgeon removes a tumor. Today, my own son was trying to have me declared insane so he could steal everything I had built. But while David laughed at my supposed senility, using an unlicensed dentist as a medical expert, he had no idea who he was really up against. Nor did he know that I already knew about every penny he had stolen from his mother's charitable foundation to finance this pathetic charade. The judge finally managed to speak, his voice hoarse with shock. My God, is it really you? David stopped laughing. If you're enjoying this story of how an underestimated father showed his greedy son who's really in charge, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what happened over the next 40 minutes was the most precise and brutal demolition that courtroom had ever witnessed. And it all started 3 months earlier, when David knocked on my door asking for $500,000. 3 months before that moment in court, David had shown up at my house with that forced smile I had known since childhood, the same one he used when he broke something and tried to hide it. Dad, I need to talk to you about an incredible opportunity, he said, walking in uninvited and throwing himself on my couch as if he owned the place. Jennifer stood in the doorway, looking around my modest living room with that look of barely concealed disgust. Since they got married 5 years ago, she has never hidden what she thinks of me, a pathetic old man who lives in a simple house while they flaunt their luxurious lifestyle downtown. It's about the resort in Miami, David continued, his eyes shining with that familiar greed. The project will bring in $50 million, Dad. $50 million. But we've had a little problem with the investors. Jennifer finally entered, but remained standing, as if sitting would contaminate her. What David's trying to say, she interrupted in that condescending voice, is that we need to borrow $500,000. Just for 6 months. $500,000. They talked about this money as if it were pocket change. It's a guaranteed 40% return, David quickly added. 40%, Dad. Where else are you going to get that at your age? At my age. As if I were senile and incapable of understanding basic math. But I already knew the Miami resort was a lie. 2 weeks ago, my old contact at the FBI called me for an informal coffee. During our conversation, he casually mentioned that he was investigating a series of Ponzi schemes in Florida, all involving phantom resorts and deluded investors. David's company name was on the list. I can't help you, I replied calmly. All my money is invested in retirement funds. The change was instantaneous. David's smile froze, then disappeared completely. Jennifer let out a bitter, cruel laugh. Of course it is, she said, crossing her arms. Big Rob and his retirement. Do you know how much money this man has stashed away? She asked David, pointing at me as if I were an object. He sold that huge house in Connecticut and got over $2 million. $2 million. And he stands there pretending he's broke. David stood up, his face red with anger. Dad, you're being selfish. We're your family. Your only family. And you're being a fool, Jennifer added. Hoarding money like a miser while your own son is trying to build something great. What they didn't know was that I had complete access to David's financial records through a system I had maintained since my days at the Department of Justice. I knew about the 3 shell companies, the loans he never paid back, and most importantly, I knew about the $230,000 he had stolen from a Helen Price Foundation, the charitable foundation I had created in memory of my late wife, his mother. Helen had died of cancer 3 years ago. The foundation funded cancer research and helped needy families with medical expenses. It was the only thing left of the most generous woman I ever knew. And my own son was stealing money meant to save lives to fund his shady schemes. "You're going to regret this," David said, walking toward the door. "When we're rolling in money and you're here alone, eating microwave meals and watching reruns on TV, you're going to regret being so stingy." Jennifer stopped in the doorway and turned to me one last time. "You know what your problem is, Rob? You were never a real father. You were always more married to your work than to your family. And now you're old, alone, and bitter. At least Helen had the decency to die before she saw what you've become." They slammed the door behind them. I sat in my chair for several minutes, processing what had just happened. It wasn't the refusal of the money that had made them angry, it was the loss of control. They expected me to be the obedient old man who opened his wallet whenever they asked. I picked up my laptop and accessed the foundation's accounts. As I suspected, there were more withdrawals. David hadn't stopped at $230,000. Last week, he had transferred another $50,000 to a personal account. Almost $300,000 stolen from his own mother's memory. That night, I got a call from Tyler, my 16-year-old grandson, David's son from his first marriage. "Grandpa," he said, his voice worried, "my dad and Jennifer are talking about you. They say you're getting strange." "Strange how, Tyler?" "They say you're forgetting things, that you can't take care of yourself anymore. Jennifer said you don't even remember my mother's name. My former daughter-in-law Sarah had died in a car accident 2 years ago. Tyler lived with me on weekends, and I knew every detail of that boy's life. Tyler, do you think I'm forgetting things?" "No, Grandpa. You remember everything. Even my basketball games that I myself forget." But I understood the strategy. They were planting seeds, preparing the ground. If they could convince enough people that I was losing my mind, it would be easier when the time came to declare me incompetent. That's when I decided it was time for the scalpel to come out of retirement. Over the next 2 months, I documented their every move. Every suspicious bank transfer, every lie told to investors, every penny stolen from the foundation. I built a dossier that would make any prosecutor salivate. But David beat me to it. Last week, I received the court notice. They were seeking emergency guardianship, claiming that I had senile dementia and posed a danger to myself and my assets. The medical expert who signed the report was Dr. Peter Lim. With a few phone calls, I discovered that Lim had lost his dental license 5 years ago for insurance fraud and illegal distribution of opioids. Now, David was paying him $25,000 to lie under oath. While David thought he was destroying me with his brilliant legal move, I already knew exactly how that game would end. Because my son had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the man who, for 30 years, had dismantled entire criminal empires with nothing but spreadsheets and patience. And now, sitting in that courtroom, watching Judge Carmichael recognize exactly who I was, I knew David was about to discover that attacking the scalpel had been the worst decision of his pathetic life. The court notice arrived on a rainy Tuesday, delivered by an officer who looked at me with that fake pity people reserve for pathetic old men. The thick envelope contained 23 pages of legal lies, every word carefully chosen to portray me as a man lost in his own reality. The petitioner alleges that Mr. Nathaniel Roberts exhibits severe signs of cognitive deterioration, I read aloud in my empty living room. Inability to manage basic financial affairs, paranoid behavior toward family, and episodes of temporal confusion. Episodes of temporal confusion. David had turned my natural caution with money into a symptom of mental illness. The attached medical report was a masterpiece of science fiction. Dr. Peter Lim claimed to have examined me personally, a blatant lie, since I had never seen the man in my life. According to his report, I had forgotten the name of my late wife during our consultation, and tried to pay the bill with toy money. Toy money. Their creativity was almost admirable. 2 hours later, Tyler showed up at my door. My grandson was visibly upset, his eyes red as if he had been crying. "Grandpa, I need to tell you something," he said, throwing himself on my couch with that drama typical of 16-year-olds. "Dad and Jennifer are saying horrible things about you at school." "What kind of things?" "They went to talk to the guidance counselor. They said you're losing your mind. That sometimes you call me by my dad's name when he was a kid. That you forget to eat and talk to yourself." Every word was a poisoned dagger. David wasn't just trying to rob me, he was meticulously destroying my reputation in every social circle I frequented. "Tyler, Have you ever seen me do these things? Never, he exploded. You remember everything. Even the name of my chemistry teacher that I mentioned once. You make the best lasagna in the world, and you always know when something is bothering me before I even know it myself. But the damage was done. I saw in his eyes the seed of doubt that David had planted. Tyler loved me, but he was young. If enough people repeated the same lie, eventually even he would begin to question his own perception. They're talking to the neighbors too, Tyler continued, his voice breaking. Mrs. Martinez said Jennifer stopped by yesterday, all worried, saying you had an episode last week. That she found you crying in the garden, not knowing where you were. Last week I was in Florida, visiting my former FBI partner. There was complete documentation of the trip, including photos I posted on social media. But how many neighbors would verify that information before accepting Jennifer's version? It was at that moment that something changed inside me. For 2 months, I had reacted defensively, trying to prove my sanity to people who had already decided to believe the most convenient lie. I was playing their game by their rules. It was time to change the rules. Tyler, I'm going to ask you something important. Do you trust me? Completely, Grandpa. Then I need you to do exactly what I ask without question, even if it seems strange. Can you do that for me? He nodded with determination. I want you to start recording your conversations with your father and Jennifer. Discreetly. Use your cell phone. Especially when they talk about me or money. Tyler looked at me in surprise, but didn't question it. He was a smart kid. He knew I wouldn't ask something like this without reason. After he left, I went to my secret office for the first time in 5 years. The space was exactly as I had left it. 3 monitors, an encrypted communication system, and files on cases that had changed American corporate history. My first call was to Sandra Mitchell, a former federal prosecutor and current criminal defense attorney. Sandra had worked on several of my most important cases during the 1990s. Rob? My God, I thought you were dead, she said, her voice mixing shock and joy. What, 8 years? 10. Sandra, I need help. My son is trying to have me declared incompetent. The silence on the line lasted exactly 15 seconds. Your son is doing what? Her voice had turned to the icy tone that made corrupt executives break out in a cold sweat. Rob, are you kidding me? I wish I was. Send me all the documents. Now. And Rob? Whoever is behind this, they have no idea who they're messing with. While scanning the legal documents, I began my own parallel investigation. David thought he knew technology because he knew how to use Instagram, but his digital footprints were pathetic. Within 40 minutes, I had access to his bank accounts, email communications, and transaction records for the past 3 years. The picture that emerged was even worse than I had imagined. The Miami resort didn't exist. It never had. David had created a shell company, forged property documents, and used computer renderings to convince investors to deposit money into accounts he controlled. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, and David had stolen over $2 million. But the real revelation came when I traced the money stolen from the Helen Foundation. The $300,000 wasn't used to finance their lifestyle. It was used as a down payment on an apartment in the Cayman Islands, a hideout for when the scheme collapsed. David wasn't just trying to steal from me. He was planning to flee the country. That night, Jennifer called. Her voice was sweet as poisoned syrup. Rob, honey, I know you must be confused about this whole legal situation. David and I only want what's best for you. I'm sure you do, I replied calmly. We know how scary it must be to lose your memory, to forget things. But don't worry, once we get guardianship, we'll take care of everything. Your finances, your home, your medical needs. That's very kind of you. Actually, she continued, we've already found a lovely facility in Riverside. It's a nursing home with specialized care. It has beautiful gardens and activities to keep your mind occupied. A nursing home. They had already chosen my prison. What about my house? I asked. Oh, we'll have to sell it, of course. To pay for medical care. But don't worry, we'll visit whenever possible. After I hung up, I sat in the darkness for several long minutes. David and Jennifer weren't just greedy, they were calculating sociopaths. They had orchestrated every detail, destroying my reputation, isolating me socially, institutionalizing me, and then selling my house to finance their international escape. It was an almost perfect plan. Almost. Because they had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the scalpel. I picked up the encrypted phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 15 years. Marcus Thompson, Deputy Director of the FBI, answered on the third ring. Rob? Man, you disappeared off the map. How's retirement? Complicated, Marcus. I need a favor. Anything, man. You saved my career in the Meridian case. I need you to discreetly investigate a Ponzi scheme in Miami. I have reason to believe it involves capital flight and international money laundering. I sent him the files I had compiled on David. 2 hours later, Marcus called me back, his voice tense. Rob, this is huge. It's not just your son, he's connected to a fraud network we've been tracking for months. You just gave us the missing link. Great. But Marcus, I need a promise. Let me handle this personally first. Then you can arrest him. Rob. 3 days. Just 3 days. Then he's all yours. A long silence. Okay. 3 days. But Rob, if he tries to leave the country. He won't try. I'll make sure of that. I hung up and looked at the documents scattered across the table. David had declared war on the wrong man. For 30 years, I had hunted financial predators far more intelligent than him. I had dismantled empires built by criminal geniuses with unlimited resources. My own son was just an amateur con man with delusions of grandeur. And in 72 hours, when we walked into that courtroom, he would find out exactly who he had tried to destroy. But first, I needed a face-to-face conversation with Dr. Peter Lim. Dr. Peter Lim lived in a rundown apartment in Van Nuys, in a complex that seemed to have been frozen in time in the 80s. The intercom was broken, so I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to door 312. The hallway smelled of mold and stale Chinese food. I knocked on the door. Shuffling footsteps approached, followed by the sound of multiple locks being opened. The door opened to reveal a short, thin man with greasy hair and nervous eyes. He was wearing a stained t-shirt and pajama pants at 2 in the afternoon. Dr. Lim. I asked in my gentlest, most confused old man voice. Who wants to know? He replied, already half closing the door. My name is Rob. I'm the patient you wrote the medical report on. The color drained from his face. He tried to close the door, but I had already put my foot in the crack. Calm down, doctor. I just want to talk. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, but his hands were shaking. Can I come in? I brought coffee. I held up a paper bag from Starbucks. And I also brought this. I showed him a black folder. It's your criminal records. Very interesting. He let me in. The apartment was a mess. Piles of dusty newspapers, dirty dishes in the sink, and a sour smell in the air. Lim sat in a torn armchair, clearly terrified. How much is my son paying? I asked directly. 25,000, he muttered, unable to look me in the eye. Only 25,000 to ruin a man's life? I made a disapproving sound. Peter, may I call you Peter? You're being greatly underestimated. I opened my briefcase and placed a photo on the dirty coffee table between us. It was Lim being arrested 5 years ago, handcuffed, being led away from his dental office by federal agents. Illegal distribution of opioids, I said calmly. 400,000 pills over 2 years. You turned your clinic into a drug supermarket. Lim was sweating now. That's in the past. I paid my debt to society. Paid it. I placed another document on the table. Peter, you were never arrested. You never served a day in jail. Want to know why? He didn't answer. Because someone posted your bail. $500,000. And then paid for the best criminal lawyers in Los Angeles. Lawyers who cost over $200,000 to get you out of jail. I placed a third sheet on the table. It was the bank transfer record. Walsh Holdings GP. My son's company. He bought you 5 years ago, Peter. You've been his property ever since. Lim finally looked at me, his eyes filled with tears. He said it was just to sign some papers. That no one would get hurt. And you believed him? I needed the money, he whimpered. You don't understand. Since I lost my license, I can't get a job anywhere. David offered me a new life. A new life. I laughed without humor. Peter, do you know what happens to people who commit perjury in federal court? He shook his head like a frightened child. 15 years in prison. No possibility of parole. His jaw dropped. But, I continued, my voice softening, I also know what happens to people who cooperate with federal investigations. I took out my cell phone and showed him a number. Marcus Thompson, FBI. This man is waiting for your call, Peter. You're going to tell him everything about David Walsh. Every transaction, every lie, every forged document. In return, you get complete immunity and enter the witness protection program. Lim stared at the phone as if it were a poisonous snake. Or, I added casually, you can continue to be my son's property until he discards you when he no longer needs you. What do you think will happen when this whole story blows up? Do you think David will protect you? I didn't have to wait for the answer. I saw in his eyes that he already knew the truth. 2 hours later, I was back in my secret office. Peter Lim had made the call. Marcus Thompson was on his way to Los Angeles with a team of federal investigators. The phone rang. It was Tyler. Grandpa, I got some recordings, he said excitedly. Dad and Jennifer are planning something for tomorrow. What kind of thing? They're going to the bank in the morning. Jennifer said something about liquidating the last assets before anyone finds out. Their last chance to drain the accounts before fleeing to the Cayman Islands. Just as I expected. Tyler, I need you to do one more thing for me. It's dangerous, but vital. Anything, Grandpa. I want you to record Jennifer talking about your grandmother's foundation. Get her to confess what they did with the money. How do I do that? Tell her you're worried about me. That you heard I'm sick and ask if she knows anything about Grandma's charity money. Play innocent. 2 hours later, Tyler sent me an audio file that was pure gold. Jennifer, thinking she was talking to a naive teenager, had confessed everything. How they stole the foundation money, how they used it to finance the resort scheme, and how they planned to blame it all on my senility if they were discovered. Your grandfather is really going crazy, she said in the recording. It's better for everyone if he's admitted to a nursing home. At least that way his money can be put to productive use. If you're following this story of how a father discovered the true face of his greedy son, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because the next revelations are breathtaking. That night, I received a call from Sandra Mitchell. Rob, I've reviewed all the documents. This case is a godsend. Not only did they commit fraud, they committed it incompetently. Explain. David forged his signature on 3 different documents related to the foundation. But he used different pens and the pressure of the writing doesn't match. Any handwriting expert can prove it's a forgery in 5 minutes. And Jennifer? Even worse. She signed foundation checks in her own name but claimed to the bank that you had authorized them verbally. We have recordings of her phone conversations with the bank manager. It's solid evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. It was better than I had imagined. They weren't just criminals, they were sloppy criminals. Sandra, I need an emergency court order. I want to freeze all of David and Jennifer's bank accounts before they can transfer any more money. I'm already preparing the documents. We can file first thing in the morning. What about the guardianship proceedings? Oh, Rob, she laughed for the first time since we reconnected. That case is going to be demolished so brutally that they'll wish they'd never heard of courts. I hung up and sat in the darkness for a few minutes, processing everything that had happened. In 72 hours, I had turned an attempted robbery into a federal operation to combat organized crime. David thought he was attacking a senile, defenseless old man. In reality, he had declared war on the investigator who brought down the most powerful financial cartel in American history. And tomorrow, when he walked into that courtroom confident and arrogant, he would discover that the scalpel had definitively come out of retirement. The game had completely changed. Now it was no longer about defending myself, it was about teaching my son that some people simply should not be underestimated. And when it was all over, David would understand why, for 3 decades, corrupt executives woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat just hearing my name. Judge Carmichael stared at me for several long seconds before addressing David's lawyer in an icy voice that cut through the silence of the courtroom like a knife. Attorney Fierro, are you sure you want to proceed with this case? David whispered something urgent in the lawyer's ear, who stood up nervously. Yes, Your Honor. We call our medical expert, Dr. Peter Lim. That's when the back door opened and Peter Lim staggered in. He was visibly panicked, sweating profusely, avoiding looking in my direction. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the documents. Dr. Lim, Fierro began, trying to maintain confidence, you examined the defendant and concluded that he suffers from severe senile dementia, correct? Lim opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He glanced at me quickly, absolute terror in his eyes. Dr. Lim. Fierro insisted, now noticing that something was wrong. I need to say something, Lim stammered, his voice breaking. This report. I never examined this man. I've never seen him before in my life. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. David jumped out of his chair. What the hell are you doing? He hissed too loudly. Sandra Mitchell rose calmly. Your Honor, I would like to present some evidence to the court. She placed a folder on the judge's desk. Bank transfers showing that my client David Walsh paid $25,000 to Mr. Lim, who has not been a doctor for 5 years. His dental license was revoked for illegal distribution of opioids. The judge examined the documents, his face darkening with each page. More importantly, Sandra continued, we have audio recordings of Mr. Walsh and his wife Jennifer confessing that they stole $293,000 from a Helen Price Foundation, a charitable foundation for cancer research established in memory of my client's late wife. David was white as a sheet. Jennifer began to sob uncontrollably. Impossible, David muttered. You can't have those recordings. That's when Tyler entered the courtroom. My 16-year-old grandson walked up to our table and handed Sandra a cell phone. Here are all the conversations, Aunt Sandra, he said loudly enough for David to hear. 3 weeks of recordings. David's expression changed from disbelief to utter horror when he realized that his own son had betrayed him. Tyler. David exploded. You don't understand what you've done. I understand perfectly, Tyler replied with a maturity that made me proud. I understand that you stole Grandma Helen's money. I understand that you tried to have Grandpa committed so you could steal everything from him. And I understand that you're a liar. Judge Carmichael banged his gavel violently. Silence. Mr. Walsh, sit down immediately or you will be removed. Sandra continued her presentation methodically. Your Honor, David Walsh not only committed fraud by attempting to obtain guardianship through perjury, but he is currently under federal investigation for operating a $50 million Ponzi scheme. She handed over another set of documents. Federal agents are currently executing search warrants at his residence and offices. The FBI has discovered that he created a phantom resort in Miami and stole over $2 million from innocent investors. David tried to stand up again, but his legs failed him. He collapsed into his chair, his face in his hands. This isn't over, he muttered desperately. You can't prove. Actually, we can, said a new voice from the courtroom entrance. Marcus Thompson, deputy director of the FBI, entered accompanied by 2 agents. David Walsh, you are under arrest for mail fraud, money laundering, and operating a Ponzi scheme. As they cuffed David, he looked at me with pure hatred. You did this. You destroyed our family. I slowly got up, walked over to where he was handcuffed, and spoke low enough that only he could hear. David, I didn't destroy our family. You did that the moment you decided to steal from your mother's memory. I just presented the bill. Jennifer was sobbing hysterically when the agents handcuffed her as well. Rob, please. I have a little girl. David forced me. You signed the checks willingly, I replied without emotion. You laughed at my supposed senility. Now you're going to learn what real consequences mean. Judge Carmichael addressed me directly. Mr. Roberts, in 30 years on the bench, I have never seen such a meticulous display of justice. This case is closed. All charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. As David was led away, he shouted one last time, This isn't over, Dad. This isn't over. But it was over. Completely. Marcus Thompson approached me as the courtroom emptied. Rob, we found the accounts in the Cayman Islands. $2.4 million hidden there. They were planning to flee the country next week. I smiled for the first time in months. I figured as much. That's why I accelerated the timeline. How the hell did you figure it all out so fast? Marcus, I replied, adjusting my tie, you've forgotten who you're talking to. For 30 years, I've dismantled empires built by criminal masterminds. My son was just a desperate amateur. Tyler approached, still processing everything he had witnessed. Grandpa, were you really the scalpel? I am, I corrected. The scalpel never really retired. I was just waiting for the right case. We left the courthouse together. On the sidewalk, Tyler asked me, what happens now? I looked up at the blue Los Angeles sky and took a deep breath. Now, Tyler, we rebuild. Your grandmother's foundation will go back to saving lives. You'll have a college life without worrying about money. And I paused, feeling the weight of decades finally lift from my shoulders. I'm going to teach other people how to protect themselves from predators like your father. True revenge had not been destroying David. It had been showing the whole world that underestimating someone based on age is the most costly mistake you can make. Especially when that person is the scalpel. 6 months after the trial, I got a call from Marcus Thompson. Rob, I thought you'd like to know. David was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Jennifer got 8 years. They tried a last-minute plea bargain, offering to return all the stolen money, but the federal judge wouldn't even listen. I was sitting in my new office on the 15th floor of a building in downtown Los Angeles. Through the window, I could see the city stretching to the horizon, a metropolis where justice and revenge sometimes meet in the same courtroom. What about the investors' money? I asked. We recovered 93%. The Cayman accounts were frozen before they could move a penny. The investors are getting back almost everything they lost. And the Helen Foundation? Fully restored. In fact, with David's assets seized, it now has more resources than ever before. $540,000 dedicated exclusively to cancer research. I hung up and stared at the sign on my desk, Roberto Price Financial Investigation Consultant. After 3 decades of retirement, the scalpel was officially back in business. Tyler walked into the office carrying 2 cups of coffee. My grandson, now 17, worked with me in the afternoons after school. The experience with his father had matured him in an impressive way. Grandpa, another case has come in, he said, handing me a folder. A 60-year-old woman whose children are trying to sell her to a nursing home to get her inheritance. I smiled. And what do you think we should do? Investigate the children first. See if there's any evidence of financial manipulation. Then build a solid case before taking action. The boy had learned well. In recent months, he had become my unofficial assistant, helping to organize cases and even conducting some preliminary research. Seeing Tyler grow in this way was one of the most rewarding parts of the whole experience. Tyler, can I ask you a personal question? He sat down in the chair across from my desk. Sure. Do you miss your father? He was silent for a long moment, processing the question with the seriousness he had developed. I miss the father I thought he was, he finally said. The man who took me to basketball games and helped me with my math homework. But that man may never have really existed. And how do you feel knowing that you were the one who provided the evidence that convicted him? Proud, he replied without hesitation. Because I learned that loyalty doesn't mean protecting someone from their own consequences. It means doing the right thing, even when it's hard. That was exactly what I hoped to hear. 3 weeks later, I received an unexpected visit. Jennifer was at the reception desk, accompanied by a lawyer. She had been granted parole after 4 months in prison in exchange for testifying against David and returning all the money that was still in accessible accounts. She looked 10 years older. Her hair was gray, without the expensive treatments of before. She wore simple clothes and carried a humility she had never shown in the 15 years I had known her. Rob, she said, her voice breaking, I came to apologize. I motioned for her to sit down. Tyler discreetly left the room. There's no excuse for what we did, she continued. Stealing from the Helen Foundation, trying to have you committed, it was monstrous. I know that now. Jennifer, why did you do it? Really? Not excuses or justifications. Why? She cried silently for a few minutes before answering. Because it was easier to see you as an obstacle than to admit that David was failing. Because it was easier to blame you for being stingy than to accept that we were broke. And because, she paused, because I was afraid that if David lost everything, he would leave me. And did he? The moment he was arrested, he blamed everything on me. He said I had influenced him, that it was my greed that had created the whole situation. 15 years of marriage, and at the first sign of real trouble, he tried to throw me under the bus. It was exactly what I expected from David. He had always been a coward when confronted with the consequences of his actions. Jennifer, do you have somewhere to stay? Any support? I'm living with my sister in Phoenix. I got a job at a clothing store. It's humiliating, after everything I've had. But it's honest. She got up to leave, but turned around one last time. Rob, you could have destroyed us completely. But you stopped when justice was served. That means something. After she left, I reflected on her words. The truth was, I could have gone much further. I could have ruined reputations, destroyed the careers of peripheral people, created much greater devastation. But that wasn't justice, it would have been cruelty. The scalpel always knew the difference between precise surgery and unnecessary destruction. A month later, Tyler showed me an article in the local newspaper. David had been attacked in prison by other inmates who had discovered his crimes against the elderly. He was in the prison hospital with serious but non-life-threatening injuries. How does it make you feel to see this? Tyler asked. It makes me feel nothing, I replied honestly. Neither satisfaction nor pity. Just recognition that there are consequences in life that go beyond what any court can impose. Does that bother you? Not feeling anything. Tyler, for 30 years, I've seen men far worse than your father face far worse fates. I've developed an ability to compartmentalize emotions when it comes to justice. David made choices. Now he lives with them. That night, I went to visit Helen's grave. It was something I had done monthly since everything had been settled. I brought fresh flowers and a report on the foundation. The foundation saved 17 lives in the last quarter, I said aloud to the headstone. We funded 3 research projects that are showing promising results. And Tyler is turning into an incredible young man. You would be proud of him. A gentle breeze rustled the trees around the cemetery. For a moment, I could almost feel her presence, approving of what we had achieved. As for David, I paused, choosing my words. He lost his way, Helen. But perhaps with enough time to think, he can find some kind of redemption. Not for our benefit, but for his own. 6 months have passed since then. My consulting firm has grown. We now have 5 investigators working with us, all specializing in financial crimes against the elderly. In the last 6 months, we have helped recover over $3 million in stolen assets and sent 12 criminals to prison. Tyler was accepted to Stanford on a full scholarship. He plans to study law and then specialize in protecting the rights of the elderly. During our celebratory dinner, he asked me a question that surprised me. Grandpa, do you think my dad can change? Really change? Why do you ask? Because he wrote me a letter from prison. Apologizing. He said he wants to see me when he gets out. I thought carefully before answering. Tyler, people can change. But real change comes from genuinely understanding the impact of your actions, not just regretting the consequences. If your father has truly changed, you'll know by his actions, not his words. What if he has changed? Would you forgive him? Forgiveness isn't about him, Tyler. It's about not carrying anger that serves no constructive purpose. I've already forgiven your father for what he did to me. But trust is something else entirely. Last week, we received a case that reminded me why I went back to work. An 82-year-old woman had been convinced by a financial advisor to invest her life savings in a scheme that promised impossible returns. She lost $400,000. The advisor was a well-dressed, eloquent 40-year-old man who used an office at a prestigious address to lend credibility to his lies. He had done the same thing to dozens of elderly people. It took me exactly 2 weeks to track him down to offshore accounts, document the entire scheme, and hand him over to the FBI with irrefutable evidence. 2 more weeks, and he was in jail. But the most satisfying part came when we managed to recover 95% of the money from the lady and other victims. Seeing the relief on her face when we handed her the check reminded me why the scalpel exists. If you've made it this far in this story of how a father taught his greedy son that some people simply should not be underestimated, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have hundreds of stories like this, people who refused to be victims and found brilliant ways to seek justice. Today, when I look back, I don't see David's attempt to destroy me as trauma, but as an awakening. 10 years after Helen's death, I had been content to be invisible, irrelevant, just an old retiree waiting for death to come. David forced me to remember who I really was. He woke up the scalpel. And while I would never wish on anyone the pain of being betrayed by their own family, I am grateful for the end result. Because now, at 73, I have purpose again. I have Tyler working alongside me. I have the Helen Foundation saving lives. And I have the satisfaction of knowing that I can still make a difference in the world. As for David, the last I heard from him was through Tyler. He was participating in a rehabilitation program in prison, helping other inmates learn basic math skills. Maybe it's just manipulation to impress the parole board. Maybe it's genuine change. Honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. Because I learned that the real victory wasn't in destroying my son. It was in rebuilding a life worth living, in creating a legacy that honors Helen's memory, and in teaching Tyler that strength doesn't come from never falling, but from always getting back up. Revenge may be sweet, but purpose is far more satisfying. And if there's one lesson in this whole story, it's this: never underestimate someone based on their age, appearance, or current circumstances. Because you never know when you're messing with someone who has spent decades perfecting the art of dismantling empires built on lies. Sometimes, the quiet old man in the corner of the room isn't just a quiet old man. Sometimes, he's the scalpel.